figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. Don't be afraid of failure because you're not going to know what works for you and your family and your obligations if it's not trial and error.
Welcome to Learning from Experience, a podcast for college students and recent grads who want to hear directly from alumni and how they've adjusted their lives post-graduation, including personal stories of success, career readiness, and tips for navigating the real world. I'm your host, Megan Finnerty, and today I'll be talking with Sally Velez, who graduated from Arizona State University in 2023 with degrees in English and history. She was also a participant of the online undergraduate research scholars program, where she examined archives at the Arizona Historical Society Museum here in Tempe and Hayden Library. She is currently attending graduate school at the University of Alabama, where she is working on obtaining her master's degree in library science. Sally is also a Family Retention Deploy Fellow with the nonprofit Blue Stars Families and has obtained a post-fellowship employment with another nonprofit, Dog Tag Bakery, working as a development coordinator. She volunteers at local United Service organizations and also does social media for her children's hockey club. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, to start us off, Sally, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're currently up to.
I live in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. So my life pretty much revolves around hockey 10 months a year outside of also working full time and being in graduate school. So it's just a lot going on at once. For job-wise for myself, just started my new position last week. So I'm really excited to delve into that as well.
So exciting to start a new position. Well, I'd love to talk about how you're able to manage all of these many facets of your life while still in graduate school.
Calendars, a lot of calendars. I have my work calendar, which I will input if there's doctor appointments, things along those lines, everything in that. I even put this podcast, even though it's outside of work hours, in my work calendar just because it's easier for me to look at that. I have my personal phone calendar. I have a to-do list that I go through, and that's a daily one. And then I also have a large monthly one that is for everyone to see, that has activities that my husband is doing, my appointments, kid activities, if there's meetings for volunteer work, such as the board meetings for my son's hockey club. Calendars have been instrumental in ensuring things are not overlapping. And if something does overlap, I figure out who do I need to contact? How can I shuffle things around? And I think that's really important, of not overextending yourself when it comes to navigating a very full life between being in graduate school and working and being a parent, because all of those are full-time things. And it's very helpful if you have a flexible job too. I'll be completely transparent on that.
Well, you were managing a lot of these same things too while you were here at ASU getting your undergraduate degree. Why has it been important to you to pursue higher education, getting your bachelor's, and now working on your master's?
Education has always been important. I took a pause in my education because I wanted to have a family a little bit younger. My husband's military, we frequently relocate, and childcare was expensive. Numerous factors were kind of going against me as to why I should work. Too often, I knew people who got their degrees, and because of the military and childcare, it was difficult to work. It was, you're paying more in childcare than you are getting it in a paycheck. And fun fact that many won't know, if you only work part-time, you are not eligible to access the childcare facilities on base. You have to work full-time to access that cheaper childcare. So for me, once the kids were in school, it was important to go back and get my degrees. I was very lucky that I was able to obtain not one, but two degrees in undergrad, and now work on a master's straight through. For me, I wanted to show my kids, okay, I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years before I started working, we'll say 8 or 9 years before pursuing my degree again. But it's never too late to do anything you set your mind to. I want to caveat, I had a great time being a stay-at-home parent. We traveled the world. We lived in Europe for a few years. It was great. But I still wanted for myself degrees and I wanted to work as well because my mom put a very strong work ethic in me on that end.
What advice would you give to students who are looking to start graduate degree programs and might be nervous about the whole work-life balance?
It's a lot, but don't be afraid to figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. Don't be afraid of failure because you're not going to know what works for you and your family and your obligations if it's not trial and error. If things went perfect, everyone would have a perfect life. And so those roadblocks that we have, those stumbling moments that really teach us. I'll be fully transparent. Last year, I took my fellowship position. It was taking a full-time course in grad school. Do not recommend taking a full-time grad school course load while working full-time. It's very doable, but it is also exhausting when you suddenly have a child who is having a medical emergency and you're at the hospital almost every day with them as well. So it is really just figuring out and what works for you and what doesn't. If the fellowship I had last year wasn't fully remote with a flexible schedule that I could do my hours however, I would not have been able to do it. So having that flexibility for work, having, even though for grad school, we meet on Zoom for each class once a week. So it's night school for 2.5 hours. Being able to carve out that time, that was a challenge some classes, but I still made it a priority even with having a sick child. I had no social life with everything going on at that point, even with the help of my partner, knowing what is important for you and your priorities more than anything when it comes to time management, when it comes to navigating graduate school along with your personal responsibilities.
You mentioned flexibility in work, but flexibility is something often that we talk about in relation to an online student. And you've done it now twice here at Arizona State University and then also at your new university. What could you tell somebody about online education and what has that allowed you to do if somebody has never taken online classes before?
The online education itself was all about time management as well. You have to understand that even though you have all these assignments due, they may not be due for 2 or 3 weeks. That time can catch up to you really fast. And so it's carving out a little bit each day to either turn in the assignment early or whenever you choose, but not leaving it to the last minute. Um, I will say Arizona State University has been a completely different experience compared to graduate school. It was no joke, even with two reading intense majors, that graduate school is so much more reading. But it's really just learning your strengths and being aware of if you can manage to carve out 2 hours a day. I found time blocking to be really effective for myself, where I will pop in my calendar, I'm going to work on reading articles for 2 hours. I am going to work on studying for an exam for an hour and a half. I am going to work on something for work or do social media for 20 minutes for my son's hockey club. Time blocking has been extremely helpful. In the time blocking, I also will even carve out breaks for myself, 10-minute breaks, because self-care is also important, which is not talked about enough. I carve in one-on-one time with my husband, that I carve in personal time for myself to listen to an audiobook, because right now I'm reading so much for work and for school. I don't have it in the capacity for myself, like no capacity to read for fun, but I can listen to an audiobook while I'm going for a walk. Undergraduate and graduate school really taught me the value in what I can and can't do in terms of time management. It is something that you have to work on, and you are going to have a hard time with it until it just becomes habit.
Has there been anything that was surprising to you that you've learned about yourself through pursuing your career and also navigating higher education?
With all of it, I knew I wanted to work on an English degree, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. As I was pursuing my English degree, I decided to add on a history degree. And when I attended hours um, for my history capstone, I fell in love with archives, and I knew I was already playing around with archives, but wanting to be an archivist. And it really solidified my desire to do that. Um, and then in graduate school, what I've been learning about library science and archives as a whole has led me to wanting to work in advocacy in some aspect, because a lot of the times public libraries and even archives, they support the community and it's a form of advocacy. And when I stumbled upon the fellowship, it's a form of advocacy, which is still where I'm at right now. And there's a lot of intersectionality between library science and what I'm doing, because it is grant writing, it is customer relationships, it is also a lot of data management. So even with a degree that you would think, okay, you're working in a public library or a special library or an archive, if you're in a research role, if you're in any kind of nonprofit role, I think a library science degree is very applicable to that as well.
Thinking back to your time at ASU, is there anything that you had wished that you had done while you were here at ASU?
I have no regrets. I joined online clubs. I was able to come to campus before graduation. I think there's no one thing I wish I would have done, but what I do want to tell others is that if you have the opportunity to be in an hours program, to do it, because I would have regretted not doing it had I not done it. Um, so that's the big one for me, is just I dove in feet first while being at ASU. Um, and it was very beneficial because I used my ASU professors as professional references, because I wasn't working for 12 years. I didn't have professional references for my fellowship. And there's no regret in that. And so that's why my big recommendation is to anyone is just be active. And if you are financially able to do it, travel to ASU and participate how you can through hours or any other program that becomes available.
Just in your own words, Sally, if somebody has no idea what the RS program is, how would you explain your experience to them?
It is almost hybrid. You travel to ASU for the week. It is at your own dime. For my experience, it was a week before classes start. So I got to see all of the incoming students, be it freshmen, sophomores, people moving into their dorms. And I got to experience ASU, and going into Hayden Library was amazing. And it really gives you a hands-on experience that you don't necessarily have in an online setting. College itself, while you are pursuing a higher education, it is all about relationships too. You're building relationships, you are making those connections. And something I really learned the past year is those connections matter, your networks matter. If you really utilize hours how it's supposed to, you are really going to broaden those connections and that network that is important for your professional development. That at the time, I don't think, even as a 34-year-old woman, truly understood until a couple years later. And that's something I think that until you realize it, you don't realize it.
Well, thank you so much, Sally, because I really feel like you're the perfect example of successfully juggling so many different things between a wife, a parent, a full time employee, full time grad school, and volunteering on the side and doing extra things that just remind you who you are and things that you enjoy. For all of those listening today and joining us, learning from Sally's experience, you can connect with her on LinkedIn if you have any questions or want to know more about English, history, or what it's like studying library science. Her LinkedIn, I'll spell her first and last name for you. It's going to be Sally, Sally. last name Velez, Velez. You can be a part of her growing LinkedIn and making more connections. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
To hear more alumni advice, head to our episode page wherever you listen to podcasts. You can visit the college's YouTube channel or visit thecollege.asu.edu/LFE podcast. See you next time.